right, so tonight we're looking at our part 3 of the history of hymnody. Like I said, I'm just going to go through a few more people, kind of just so we understand where hymns really came from. And so we did Martin Luther last week. We'll do Isaac Watts this week. We're going to look at the Wesley brothers and especially Charles next week. And then we'll finish with Fanny Crosby, first of all, because we definitely need to fit a woman in there, but second of all, because of all of those, she's the most prolific of all of the writers. So we'll spend some time with her, and then we'll be breaking off and just looking at, more specific just hymns or a couple of hymns a week and talking about the writers and the music itself. But Isaac Watts is really very important in this kind of growth of hymns, and you'll figure out why as we go along. But if we remember, the shift that happens really with Martin Luther is that he says that the music should be written in the language of the people, and that's the main shift that he makes in the hymns. He pretty much still sticks to doing mostly hymns that are based on psalms, although we can argue that he's starting to move away from the music being so specifically a direct translation of the psalm. And also we know that he did take some inspiration from the Gospels for some of the hymns that he wrote and inspired. But that's really the next kind of step that Isaac Watts is going to make a part of. Because of his work in hymnody, he gets 2 titles. I only gave the one here, and I didn't even finish the quote, so I apologize. But Father of English Hymnody. Now, this one he really owns. I mean, he was the first real English hymn writer that made a mark in British hymnody. But some people call him also the father of modern hymns. I don't know if he deserves that title or not, because there's just so many people that I think that we could say kind of helped us get to where we were at in the modern sense. But definitely when it comes to British hymnody and the kind of first one that really puts his mark on it, he gets that. So his father is very interesting. His father was now. So before I say this, we should understand that we're talking about 100 years after the Lutheran Church has been formed by Luther. Well, not really specifically by Luther, but more like by the people that wanted Luther to start a church because the Catholic Church didn't want to listen to him. And so then we also get this breakaway of the Anglican Church. Now we can talk about why the Anglican Church splits from the Catholic Church. Definitely there's some Protestant reasons, but we also know that the king had a lot to do with that and some very political or not even political relationship issues that the king had to make that happen. But at this point, the Anglican Church is broken away from the Catholic Church. And we have a group of people that are almost kind of the Martin Luthers of the Anglican Church, and they're called dissenters. And they form their own churches that are Anglican in some ways, but also kind of are fighting against the Anglican Church. Now, there's a number of reasons for this, and I'm not going to get into all of it, but one of the major reasons is because we are in the middle of the time of reason and enlightenment, or the Enlightenment period. And church starts to have a lot of conversations and discussions and arguments about how does religion and enlightenment live in the same world. Is it possible? How do religion and science live in the same world? I know AUMC thinks that it's the first church in this area to have that conversation, but unfortunately these conversations were happening in Europe in the 1600s. But it's still a conversation that's being had today. How do these things all live together? His father was a pastor, and so dissenters oftentimes would go to a non-Anglican church, but they're also called non-conformist churches, but they would just be fined sometimes by the government if they chose not to go to a sanctioned Anglican church. But a pastor of a non-conformist church or a dissenter church could be jailed for being a pastor of this kind of church. And so his father was put in jail many, many times, including right after Isaac Watts was born. And so because of this, some people say that he was weaned on the stairs of a jail because his mother sat on the jail steps of the jail to waiting for her husband to get out of jail while she was raising her young infant child. The father went on, Isaac was the first child, and the father went on to have, I think, 7 more children. So the father and mother, I should say, she gets credit also. But so, it doesn't keep him from being a member of society, but he is put in jail a number of times during Isaac's young life, and that has to have had some sort of effect to watch his father standing up for what he believed in, what he thought was right, and to be willing to go to jail for that. And so a lot of people really credit that kind of background as an important part of what made Isaac who he was. Looking at his canon of hymns, again, we need to really be thinking, when we're talking about how many hymns he wrote, Isaac was truly a poet. So we're not talking about tunes. We're just talking about poems or texts. And so he wrote and published somewhere between 700 and 750 hymns in his lifetime. Although that seems impressive, Charles Wesley wrote somewhere around 8,000 to 8,500, and Fanny Crosby wrote over 9,000. So, I mean, it's impressive, but he still is not at that level. Because he lived in this time of reason and enlightenment, it was very important for him to find a balance between church and religion and enlightenment. He also considered himself a dissenter, so much so that he was very smart. He spoke at a very young age numerous languages, including Latin, Hebrew, and Greek. And as he got older, he was very valued for his intelligence and was offered scholarships to both Oxford and Cambridge, which were the top 2 universities at the time. But he refused to accept those scholarships, and he went to a much smaller university that was a dissenter college. It was a college that was specifically run by dissenters of the Anglican Church. He did become a pastor himself and ended up spending most of his life as the pastor of, sorry, I have to find the note where I wrote that down. Oh, come on. Where did I put it? I have it somewhere in my notes. I'll find it in a minute. But anyway, but he was the pastor of the same church for many, many years. All right. One of my favorite things about him is he wrote a very important book, a book that was later considered a textbook for Yale University, Cambridge University, and Oxford University. But I love this title because, I can't even imagine having to, come up with this title. But anyway, Logic was the main title, and you can still find it today under those words. But the secondary title was The Right Use of Reason in the Inquiry After Truth, with a variety of rules to guard against error in the affairs of religion and human life, as well as in the sciences. It's a very long title, but a fun one. So he definitely spent a lot of time trying to figure out how can you be a person of faith and a person that also considers intellectual things and enlightened things, and especially science. And that was very important to him. Here are some pictures of him at different stages in his life. One of the reasons I'm showing you a number of them is because there's something very interesting about the way he is depicted. So one of the things we know about him is that he had a lot of health problems, many of them physical, but also he actually had a lot of mental and emotional health problems as well. And his illness really took its toll on his personal life. He did try to get married, and the woman, it was said, rejected him because she liked the fact that he was a good person and she liked who he was as a person, but she did not want to marry the casket that carried his good personality. She found him to be a person who looked very ill and unsightly, which is very interesting because if you look at these pictures, you probably wouldn't think that about that. But he was 5 foot tall. He was very pale and very skinny framed, and it was also known that he had a disproportionately oversized head. But almost every portrait of him depicts him in a large gown with extremely large folds, which is an attempt by the artist to disguise his small frame. This was probably the reason for this is the rejection. In which the Elizabeth Singer, who rejected him his proposal for marriage, said that she loved the jewel inside but could not admire the casket which contained it. So this is the very first hymn that he wrote. And the story behind this hymn is that he was complaining to his father about the bad hymn singing happening in church. This is the quote that he said to his father: "To see the dull indifference, the negligent and thoughtless air that sits upon the faces of a whole assembly while the psalm is upon their lips, might even tempt a charitable observer to suspect the fervency of their inward religion." He had been bemoaning the bad or the poor singing of hymns since he was young, and so his father, tired of the complaints, told him, "Go ahead, then write something better." And the following week, he presented as an adolescent, he was about 18 or 19, he presented this hymn to his father to be sung in the church: "Behold the glories of the Lamb." It received enthusiastic response, and it spurred him to start writing hymn texts. Now, there's a number of things going on here. One of the really important things that we know about him is that in this attempt to try to find the balance between enlightenment and religion, he was very frustrated that in all the churches in England at this time, this idea of enlightenment brought to light that emotion showed a lack of intellect. And so to come into church and be emotional, to sing with emotion, to have emotion for God, was seen as a weakness. And this was very much an argument or an idea that he fought against. That to have faith that has emotions tied to it is not weak. I just found the note about where he served. He was the pastor at Mark Lane Chapel in London for most of his life. But anyway, and so he really found it very important to try to help people experience not just the stories of the Bible or the Psalms of the Bible, but to really start to experience some emotional connection, or just to have a poetic experience of singing and speaking about God. And so this became very important in his texts. And so because of this, oftentimes his texts are said to be a bit florid or overly descriptive, because he really wants people to experience something in the hymn, not just kind of recite a psalm. We also know that he fought a very large battle about this idea of psalms being turned directly into hymns. He believed that we should go farther than just using the psalm, although he oftentimes uses the psalm for inspiration. But he says that the Psalms ought to be translated in such a manner as we have reason to believe David would have composed them if he had lived in our day and known Jesus Christ. So his argument was that if you only sing the Psalms, you're only singing from the Old Testament, and that the gospel message is missing in the Psalms. Now we can talk about, some of the Psalms have messages that sound like they're talking about a coming Christ and things like that. But overall, what he's saying is that if the hymns were a major part of helping people to experience and understand their faith, which is what really Luther fought for and became very popular in Calvin's theories of utilizing hymns and hymnody, and then moved into the Anglican beliefs as well. That we shouldn't only tell the story of the Psalms. We should make sure that the gospel story is also included in this. So this is his first text. Behold the glories of the Lamb amidst his Father's throne. Prepare new honors for his name and songs before unknown. Let elders worship at his feet, the church adore around, with vials full of odors sweet and harps of sweetest sound. Those are the prayers of all the saints, and these the hymns they raise. Jesus is kind to our complaints. He loves to hear our praise. Now to the Lamb that once was slain be endless blessings paid. Salvation, glory, joy remain forever on thy head. Thou hast redeemed our souls with blood, hast set the prisoners free, hast made us kings and priests to God, and we shall reign with thee. So we definitely see the gospel story coming alive. Now we can argue theologically if this is a text that a more progressive church would sing, but we definitely see the gospel message coming alive in this text. We also see these very florid lines. Let elders worship at his feet, the church adore around, with vials full of odors sweet and harps of sweetest sound. You can hear that he's evoking emotion. He's evoking a sense of beyond the fact of here's the facts of what you need to know what's in the Bible and what the Bible says. He's really trying to help people have an experience of what God is, of what worshiping is, of what praise is, as he is going through this. As he's working through some of these ideas of how to kind of engage both reason and emotion together, and religion, here's a quote from him. Even where reason is bright and the judgment clear, yet it will be ineffectual for any valuable purposes if religion reach no farther than the head and proceed not to the heart. It will have but little influence if there are none of the passions engaged. Cold, unaffecting notions will have no powerful influence to reform our lives. I think it's interesting because we're having this argument in some ways again in the 20th and 21st century about praise music. How much of it should be arousing our intellect and how much of it should be arousing our emotions. And I think if you really had that question asked to all of us or anybody in our church, you'd have 5,000 different responses. That there are people that are more attracted to emotional texts and texts that kind of hit their heart, and some people want more of the intellectual. And so I'm not sure. I think he thinks they're both important. I don't think he's saying that the intellectual is bad. I just think he's saying that the intellectual, without any sort of heart in it, really lacks something that's important to us. And then just a great quote about his thoughts on the power of singing in church. He says, "Let us remember that the very power of singing was given to human nature chiefly for this purpose, that our own warmest affections of soul might break out into natural or divine melody, and that the tongue of the worshiper might express his own heart." So he really understands the hymns as an expression of our heart and as an expression of our soul and what we love. And so I think it's a really interesting take. So Wesley wrote, actually I want to go back really quick because I want to say something really quick. So Wesley wrote a number of hymns that we would recognize within his 700 or 750 or so. When I survey the wondrous cross, I sing the almighty power of God. Oh, our God, our help in ages past. You'll notice that I said our God, our help. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Joy to the world, from all that dwell below the skies. This is the day the Lord hath made. I'll praise my Maker while I have breath. Those are just some, and most of those are in our hymnal, if not all of them. Now, almost every one of those is based on a psalm, but they also, if you think about them for just a minute, when I survey the wondrous cross, Jesus shall reign, also include a gospel message. And so he's really bringing in this important notion that the gospel message should be included in most hymns. So this is... other than the fact that it has the changed first line, which originally was "Our God, our help in ages past," this is the original 9 verses that he wrote for this hymn. Now again, he only wrote the text for this. We'll talk about the tune in a moment. But can I have somebody who would want to read a couple of stanzas for me?
I can do that.
Great. If you'll read 1 and 2, and then somebody else read 3 and 4, and we'll go on and so forth. I just want to show you, number one, you all complain sometimes when we sing 3 or 4 verses. He wrote 9, but also I just wanted you to experience the entire text that he wrote for this hymn. Go ahead, Doug.
Okay. O God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, our shelter from the stormy blast, and our eternal home. Under the shadow of thy throne, thy saints have dwelt secure. Sufficient is thine arm alone, and our defense is sure.
Great. Somebody else want to take verse 3 and 4?
I will.
Great.
Before the hills in order stood, or earth received her frame, from everlasting thou art God, to endless years the same. Thy word commands our flesh to dust. Return, ye sons of men. All nations rose from earth at first, and turned to earth again.
Can somebody else do 5 and 6? Don't be shy. It's right in front of you. There's no answers you have to think for yourself.
I can read again if no one else wants to.
I'll do it, but I can't see 6, Tim. I only see 5. Oh, there it is. Okay. 1,000 ages in thy sight are like an evening gone, short as the watch that ends the night before the rising sun. The busy tribes of flesh and blood, with all their lives and cares, are carried toward by, can't see it.
By the flood.
By the flood and lost in following years.
Great. Somebody finish the last 3?
Yes, I'll do it.
Thank you.
Time like an ever-rolling stream bears all its sons away. They fly forgotten as a dream dies at the opening day. Like flowery fields the nations stand, pleased with the morning light. The flowers beneath the mower's hands lie withering ere it's night. 'Tis night, ere it's night. O God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, be thou our guard, guard while troubles last, and our eternal home.
Thank you. So you probably recognize some of those verses because 6 of them are in our hymnal,
Yes.
but there are 3 that are not. So how did we get to the version that we have now? Well, first of all, like I said, it was originally called Our God, Our Help. This was written originally during the time of the reign of Queen Anne. And hold on, I've got to find my note on this. So it was written in 1714, and it was shortly before the death of Queen Anne of England. It was a time of great crisis and turmoil in England, as the successor of Queen Anne was not yet determined, and the fear of a monarch who would reinstate the persecution of Protestants was running rampant throughout the country. King George I prevented such persecution, but the fear before Anne's death was great. And this is the context in which Watts is writing his powerful text. Now, it's written based on Psalm 90, but he's also literally writing to the people of the time, trying to give a sense of comfort that even though there is an unknown idea of what is going to happen in their lives with the monarch that is passing away and who will come after, that God is there and present in all ages, whether it is the past or the present or the future. And so this is kind of the background. It's also very interesting that the tune that originally, or that is eventually connected to this, and very early kind of in, if you study tunes, but it was not, the tune wasn't written until 1861, so over a year, or over 150 years after the text is written, but the tune was put together with it in 1861 and has stayed with it ever since. Now we'll talk a little bit about the tune in a minute, but how do we get the text that we have today, and which hymn or which verses were appropriate? Well, you can thank the Wesley brothers for that. The Wesley brothers had a vested interest in this being an important hymn within their ministry, and as soon as they found it, they were very attracted to it. But it was originally titled "Our God, Our Help in Ages Past," and the reason that John Wesley decided to change it from "Our God" to "O God" is that he felt that the adjective "our" attached to God implied a Calvinistic God who was the province only of the elect. For the Wesleys, the grace of God was open to all, not just the elect. And so one word and again, why I point this out is it's interesting for this hymn, but it's so telling of how things get decided in the church and changed, is that, you know, this idea of theology is so important, and how we look at theology in how we you know, have words and texts and things like that in hymns. And so John Wesley changed it from "Our God" to "O God," and printed it in a collection of psalms and hymns in 1738. And then continued to utilize it in his collection of hymns for the use of the people called Methodists in 1780.
So Tim,
Yes.
was it sung or just read without a tune?
So we understand that in some places it would have been just read, but it was sung. I have looked everywhere and I cannot find. This tune is so connected to this hymn, even though it was written 150 years after the text. I cannot find another printing of this text with any other tune. So most likely it is a very traditional meter. So it is an 8/6/8/6 meter, also known as common meter. And so they would have had folk tunes and possibly bar tunes and other things that they were already aware of and knew that they could sing with this. But I cannot find a printing of this text with any other tune other than the one we know now. So we have no knowledge of what tunes they would have sung it to in Watts's time. Does that make sense? So let's quickly look at the Watts claims that he utilized verses 1 through 5. I've given us 1 through 6 just because that's the end of that kind of stanza of the psalm, but this is the psalm that he's basing it on. Why I wanted us to look at this is that when we looked at the one last week from Martin Luther, we definitely saw a pull away from the psalm and a little bit of the gospel placed in, but we really start to see how Isaac is really utilizing this psalm as inspiration and not in any sort of way of trying to directly quote it. So, Lord, you have been our dwelling place through all generations. Before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. You turn people back to dust, saying, return to dust, you mortals. 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night. Yet you sweep people away in the sleep of death. They are like the new grass of the morning. In the morning it springs up new, but by evening it is dry and withered. So there's some pieces that we definitely recognize. The dwelling place through all generations. Before the mountains were born, we see something similar to that. From everlasting to everlasting, you are God. The 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night. We see much of that. So, for example, before the hills in order stood, or earth received her frame, from everlasting thou art God, to endless years the same. That's almost a direct translation with a little poetry added. 1,000 ages, verse 5, in thy sight are like an evening gone, short as the watch that ends the night before the rising sun. But one of the things that people point out is that there's definitely, and this psalm goes deeper into sin type texts than just what we get in the this idea of death and sweeping us away and withered and that sort of thing. We don't see that. Now, some might argue that that was a theology of Isaac Watts's. I'm not so sure about that, because there definitely are other texts where he definitely acknowledges sin and our part that we play in sin. But I think it's important to remember that he's writing this in a time where people are feeling doom, and he's trying to give hope. And so I think, at least this is just my opinion, there's no scholarship out there that's definitely saying this for sure, but I think that we see that hope very much in what he chooses to pull from the psalm, and because he believes that the gospel, which we understand the gospel to be a text full of hope as well, he's trying to bring that out. And we also have to remember he's still writing for young Christians, for people who, their parents, at least, if not themselves, grew up in a church that didn't want them to understand or read the Bible themselves. And so they're still really preaching to a very young church, and he's really trying to get the important messages of the gospel across. Now, actually, before I do this, I want to do one other thing. So I want to go back to this text for just a minute. Now, I want to give you an experience. So we have tunes that we know really well today that have this same meter as the tune that we utilize for this hymn. As I said, this is common meter, or 8/6/8/6. So one example of common meter in our hymnal is Amazing Grace. Now, we know for a fact that Amazing Grace was not written in the 1600s. And so it's not a tune they would have had, but I want you to have the experience of both what they would have done back then to go, well, what tune should we put with this? But also what sometimes I'm doing today when I find a text that maybe we don't know that hymn tune, but I like the text and I want us to be able to sing it, and I go looking for other hymn tunes that might work with it. So I'm going to sing for you, and if you want to join in, just make sure your mics are off, because it'll get weird otherwise if you're going to sing along. But we're going to sing the first verse to Amazing Grace. So, O God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, our shelter from the stormy blast, and our eternal home. So what are your thoughts about that tune with this text? Does it work? Do you like it?
I like
It
it.
fit perfectly.
Yeah. So I think if we didn't know the tune that we know to it, it would work quite nicely with Amazing Grace. So then another one that works with this that is also 8/6/8/6 is Oh, for a Thousand Tongues. So, oh God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, our shelter from the stormy blast, and our eternal home. So what do you think? Do you like that one as well as Amazing Grace?
That works as well.
It
Fits
works.
real well.
It's interesting. It's a little peppier than Amazing Grace, and so it depends on is it are you trying to kind of bolster with peppiness, or are you trying to be a little more serious with kind of an Amazing Grace type text? And then the last one that I was going to give you an example of is while shepherds watch their flocks, also is common meter. So hold on, I gotta. Oh God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, our shelter from the stormy blast, and our eternal home. And then it repeats the last line, and our eternal home. So what do you think about that one compared to the others?
I don't like that one quite as well as the first one.
No, I don't like
You want
that
to
one.
sing the original song that you know to that tune.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're going to get to that next. So, so it's really interesting to just see kind of the experience of going through. Somebody's written this text. We have these tunes that they know, and they're trying to figure out which one goes best. And now let's look at the tune that eventually becomes connected to this hymn, and it's this. Oh God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, our shelter from the stormy blast, and our eternal home. So, what do you think about that one compared to the others that we looked at?
That's the one you're familiar with and is most comfortable to sing, I think.
And I think that's an important thing, right? Part of it, our likes of what tune we like with it is the one that we learned and it feels comfortable, right? And I think that had to have been a determination at some level when different churches were choosing which ones they wanted to sing with new texts that were being written. I think this one has a more majestic feel and sense to it than Amazing Grace or while shepherds watch their flocks, or even O for a Thousand Tongues, even though we would think of O for a Thousand Tongues as being majestic, this one definitely has more majesty. And I think a lot of that is because of what we call the rising line. So there's this really interesting thing happening here. If you look at the first two notes, so it's really so, mi, la, so, do, do, ti, do in the solfege. So I'm not going to go on right now, but if you look at that, you get this sense of both a rising and falling. The oh God is a falling thing because it's going from a higher note to a lower note. Then we get that again, our help, and then in ages, but then we end on do, this high do. So there's this sense of both us recognizing our humility and our non eternal quality of humanity. And so we are acknowledging that in the way that we are going downward in the tune. Da-dum, ba-dum, ba-da-da-da. But then also at the same time, the da-dum, da-dum, da is going up. So there's this juxtaposition of both a humility as well as an acknowledgement of God and the bigness and the power and the everlasting nature of God, which I think is really interesting and continues to go through this. We continue to see this idea even in the next line. Ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. There's now it inverts and we have a descending line with acknowledgement of going up in each one. Da-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. So it inverts what happens in the second, and then the first stanza. Then da-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. And then we're kind of playing within that, in that middle stanza. And then da-dum, da-dum, ba-da-da-dum. And then we go back to our eternal home, kind of going up to these higher notes and really acknowledging the largeness of God. So it's interesting. I think, you know, it's definitely the one we know and is comfortable, but I think that there is a reason this text and this tune have been married together for so many years, and it's because they work so well in both the message and what the music does to kind of help us experience that message. Any thoughts about that?
Tim, I just like the ability to take these favorite old hymns that sound so good musically and putting words that are more relevant to them. That's what has meaning to me, and I feel this great emotional thing coming from those old songs, but I don't really agree with what the words are.
Totally, and it's hard when the theology, and you know, this was even something that the Wesley brothers are arguing just 20, 30 years after this hymn is written, is the theology doesn't fully work for them. So this is a conversation that continues to be had. And my goal in this class is definitely not to force any sort of theology, and we can definitely discuss some of the theology in this. I think we also just have to realize that Watts is definitely coming from a different time period where theology is viewed differently as well.
Tim, did people sing it just with one melody? There was no harmony? Everyone sang the same?
So at this time period, yes, that would have mostly been the case. And the simple reality of that is that they were so unused in this time period to being allowed to sing in the church that and the important nature of people feeling the ability to participate was so important that they would have kept it as simple and easy, which is why they're picking tunes that people know and are hopefully singing at home with nursery rhymes or other things that they would have learned, because it really helps the people to feel that they can be participatory. I mean, in some ways, that's still the same today. When we sing from the chancel, it's fun when I go into harmonies, but sometimes it throws someone off and their ability to connect with that piece. And so you'll notice that if it's a newer piece, I don't always go into harmony when we're singing something, especially when it's just right now when Beth and I are leading, because I want the people to feel that they can pick up on the tune. So a lot of it has to do with the theology of how people participate as well, which has its own theology. So just a little bit about, so this tune was originally written in 1861 and was written for a setting of Psalm 42. I didn't find the actual text of Psalm 42 that this was attached to, but it was, as I said, became very quickly paired to this text and has lived with it ever since. It is believed that it was composed by a gentleman named William Croft. That's why you'll see at the very bottom, it's a very small print, but it says attributed to William Croft. And it says 1708 on there. I do not believe that that is actually the case, that it was... well, actually, you may be right that was when it was written. I think it was in 1861 that it was connected to this hymn. So I apologize. I think I said that incorrectly. But anyway, it's just a very interesting thing that there are some hymns that have been connected to a number of tunes, where this one seems to have lived with this tune very much for a long time. So I wanted to end our time together by giving us a chance to sing along. If you will make sure that your microphones are turned off so that, again, we can sing along without having delayed times. But I did not find the same church that we'd used for the last 2 weeks, but I did find another recording with a beautiful organ playing. And so I thought we would sing through this hymn together. O God, our help.
Can't hear it.
I apologize. Let me make sure. I'm not sure that I turned on computer sound. I apologize. That was one thing that I did not do when I set it up. So let's try that again. Can you hear it now?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, turn your mics off again, please. Sorry. All right, so although the text may have, because of its age and the church that it was written for, some theological things, I think that as we read the Bible and as we sing hymns, we can still find messages that still speak to us today. And I think the one for that is to think about a hymn that was written in a time where people were unsure of what the future looked like. And I think that there is definitely a sense of that today. and that we are reminded that that God has been present in the 17 and 1800s when times were unsure, and is still present in the current times and helps us through the unsurety as well. So that is a beautiful message through the ages to us again tonight. So I hope you learned a little bit about Isaac Watts. I think definitely an interesting person. You know, when you sing "Joy to the World" in Christmas time, you can remember him. Of course, I didn't mention every hymn that he did, so if you want to look, there's other lists out there that you can explore more of his hymns. One that we don't sing very often, that you'll hear me use the tune a lot because I love the tune, but "Jesus shall reign where'er the sun" has a very similar kind of a sense of this presence of God in unsurety as well.